Imagine biting into a crisp, juicy watermelon on a scorching summer day, relishing the cool sweetness as it washes over your palate. You eat without concern, spitting out the occasional seed or, more likely these days, enjoying the convenience of a seedless variety. It is a simple pleasure, seemingly harmless and natural. But what if I told you that this mundane act, consuming seedless fruit, represents one of the most profound biological gambles humanity has ever taken? What if that innocent watermelon slice, that seedless grape, that navel orange, is part of a vast, invisible experiment that could fundamentally destabilize our food supply? The story of seedless fruit is not just about agricultural convenience. It is about genetic bottlenecks, biodiversity collapse, and the silent ticking of an evolutionary time bomb that scientists increasingly worry we may have set ourselves. In laboratories across the world, researchers are beginning to document a disturbing pattern. Our reliance on cloned, genetically identical crops has created vulnerabilities so severe that a single pathogen could potentially wipe out entire fruit varieties from our planet. Not for a season, but forever. Dr. Diana Reynolds, a senior botanist at the Agricultural Genomics Institute, puts it bluntly: "We are creating an agricultural system with the genetic diversity of a house of cards. And nature," she warns, "always has a strong wind ready to blow." To understand the looming disaster of seedless fruits, we must first understand how we got here. A journey that begins not in modern laboratories, but in ancient groves and primitive farms thousands of years ago. Long before humans understood genetics or cellular biology, they observed a curious phenomenon in nature. Occasionally, fruit-bearing plants would produce mutant offspring that developed fruits without viable seeds. These mutations occurred spontaneously, genetic accidents that would typically spell evolutionary doom for the plants bearing them. After all, a plant that cannot reproduce through seeds has reached an evolutionary dead end. But humans, with their unique capacity to interfere with natural selection, saw opportunity where nature saw failure. As early as 3000 BCE, Persian farmers discovered they could propagate seedless varieties through cuttings and grafting. By taking a branch from a seedless mutant and attaching it to the rooted stem of another plant, they could multiply the genetic anomaly indefinitely. The earliest documented cultivation of seedless fruits appears in ancient Chinese agricultural texts from the Han Dynasty, describing techniques for propagating stoneless peaches. By the Roman era, Pliny the Elder wrote in his natural history about certain grapes that lack seeds, considered delicacies for the elite. These early seedless varieties were rare treasures, maintained through painstaking horticultural techniques passed from generation to generation. But the real transformation, from rare novelty to commercial staple, began in the late 19th century, when botanist Herbert Weber at the U.S. Department of Agriculture developed the first commercial seedless grapes through selective breeding. By the mid-20th century, agricultural scientists had expanded their toolkit dramatically, employing techniques like chromosome doubling, creating polyploid plants, hormone treatments, and radiation-induced mutations to create seedless versions of everything from watermelons to mandarins. The commercial logic seemed impeccable. Consumers preferred seedless fruits for their convenience. No seeds to spit out, no interruption of the eating experience, perfect for children and processing into juices. Farmers embraced them because uniformity simplified harvesting and marketing. Food processors loved them because they streamlined production. By the early 21st century, seedless variants dominated supermarket shelves for many fruit categories. But there was a catch, several, in fact, that few considered in this headlong rush toward convenience. Benjamin Whitfield, an evolutionary biologist at Pacific Botanical Research Center, explains, "We essentially created fruit varieties that cannot survive without human intervention. These plants have surrendered their evolutionary autonomy for commercial appeal." This dependency might seem like a mere curiosity. After all, many domesticated crops rely on human cultivation. But the difference with seedless fruits is profound. Most crop plants, even heavily domesticated ones, retain the ability to reproduce sexually through seeds, allowing for genetic recombination with each generation. This recombination is not merely an abstract biological process. It is the very mechanism that allows plants to adapt to changing environmental conditions, evolving resistance to new diseases and pests. Seedless fruits, by contrast, are genetic clones, exact replicas of a single parent plant, propagated through grafting or tissue culture. Every Thompson seedless grapevine growing anywhere in the world is genetically identical to every other one. The same is true for Cavendish bananas, wonderful pomegranates, and countless other commercially dominant varieties. This creates a biological scenario without precedent in nature. Vast monocultures of genetically identical plants spanning continents, all sharing exactly the same strengths and vulnerabilities. It is an arrangement that defies the most fundamental principle of evolutionary biology, diversify or die. As Dr. Reynolds puts it, we've created the perfect storm for catastrophic crop failure, identical plants with identical immune systems, identical weaknesses, waiting for the right pathogen to exploit them all simultaneously. The stage was set for a disaster that few saw coming, but to understand its full dimensions, we need to examine what makes seedless propagation so fundamentally different from natural reproduction, and why that difference matters more than ever in our rapidly changing world. The true scale of our seedless fruit predicament becomes apparent when we look at the banana, perhaps the most stark warning system nature has provided us regarding the dangers of seedless monoculture. The banana you ate for breakfast this morning is almost certainly a Cavendish, the variety that accounts for 99% of all exported bananas worldwide. Yet few consumers realize they are eating the replacement banana, the understudy that was pressed into service when the original export banana, the Gros Michel, was virtually wiped from the face of the earth in the mid-20th century. The story of the Gros Michel banana is essentially a preview of what could happen to all our seedless fruit crops, explains Dr. Malcolm Jenkins, a plant pathologist who specializes in emerging agricultural threats at Cornell University. It's a case study in vulnerability that we've somehow managed to forget. Until the 1950s, the Gros Michel dominated the global banana trade. By all accounts, it was superior to the Cavendish, sweeter, creamier, with a more robust skin that resisted bruising during shipping. But it had one fatal flaw. Every single commercial Gros Michel banana plant was a clone, reproduced through offshoots rather than seeds. When a soil-borne fungus called Panama disease, Fusarium oxysporum F. sp. cubens, emerged, it found in these plantations not a diverse population of genetically varied individuals, but rather what amounted to a single organism spread across thousands of square miles. The fungus tore through Central and South American plantations with devastating efficiency, destroying the entire industry in less than a decade. The banana industry survived only by switching to the Cavendish, which happened to be resistant to that particular strain of Panama disease. But the industry learned precisely the wrong lesson from this catastrophe. Instead of developing genetic diversity in their crops, they simply replaced one monoculture with another. It was like watching someone narrowly escape a car crash because they were thrown clear through the windshield, and then concluding that windshields are unnecessary, says Benjamin Whitfield. The banana industry doubled down on the very system that had failed them. Today, a new strain of Panama disease, tropical race 4, is sweeping through Cavendish plantations across Asia, Africa, and now Latin America. Plant pathologists give the Cavendish banana, as we know it, perhaps 20 years before it suffers the same fate as the Gros Michel. But the banana's troubles are merely the most visible manifestation of a much larger problem. Across the agricultural spectrum, our seedless fruits face similar vulnerabilities, each variety an identical army marching toward an uncertain future. Take navel oranges, all of which descend from a single mutant branch discovered in a Brazilian monastery in 1820. Every single navel orange tree on Earth, millions of them spanning continents, is genetically identical to that original mutation. They have not evolved for over 200 years, while the pests and pathogens that prey on citrus have gone through countless generations of adaptation. It's an evolutionary arms race where one side hasn't moved in 2 centuries, explains Dr. Diana Reynolds. Imagine trying to fight a modern army with muskets and bayonets. That's essentially what these trees are doing. This genetic stasis extends across the seedless fruit spectrum. Seedless watermelons, created by chromosomal manipulation, are cloned from a handful of original varieties. Seedless grapes, which now constitute over 98% of table grapes sold in the United States, trace back to a remarkably small genetic pool. The problem extends beyond just disease vulnerability. Seedless varieties, maintained through clonal propagation, have lost the ability to adapt to changing climate conditions. As global temperatures rise and rainfall patterns shift, conventional seeded crops can evolve through natural selection and human breeding programs that utilize their genetic diversity. Seedless varieties, by contrast, are frozen in time, adapted perfectly to a climate that increasingly no longer exists. Researchers at the University of California, Davis have been monitoring the performance of seedless grape varieties under simulated climate change scenarios. Their findings are troubling. Many popular seedless varieties show significant declines in yield, sugar content, and disease resistance when exposed to the temperature and moisture conditions projected for their growing regions by 2050. These plants have no evolutionary escape hatch, says Dr. Eliza Thornton, lead researcher on the UC Davis study. When environmental conditions change beyond their tolerance range, they cannot adapt through seed-based reproduction. They can only die. The vulnerability extends beyond the plants themselves to the complex web of organisms that evolved alongside them. Many insects, birds, and mammals depend on fruit seeds as a food source. The expansion of seedless varieties has created what ecologists call ecological dead ends. Fruits that provide calories but fail to fulfill their evolutionary role in seed dispersal and supporting wildlife nutrition. Dr. Sanjay Patil, an ecologist who studies plant-animal interactions at the University of Michigan, has documented declining populations of seed-eating birds in regions dominated by seedless grape production. These fruits may look natural, he explains, but ecologically speaking, they're fundamentally different from their seeded ancestors. They extract resources from the environment without participating in the co-evolved relationships that maintain ecosystem health. But perhaps the most alarming dimension of seedless fruit cultivation emerges when we consider the genetic mechanisms that render these plants sterile in the first place. Many commercial seedless varieties are triploid, possessing 3 sets of chromosomes instead of the normal 2. This chromosomal abnormality prevents the proper formation of viable seeds but also creates inherent genetic instability. Dr. Amara Valentin, a cytogeneticist at the Max Planck Institute for Plant Breeding Research, has been studying genetic degradation in long-term clonal crops. Her research reveals a disturbing pattern. Over many generations of clonal reproduction, genetic errors accumulate in the absence of the genetic reset that sexual reproduction normally provides. Clonal reproduction is like making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, Dr. Valentin explains. Eventually, the errors become significant. In natural plant populations, sexual reproduction through seeds allows the purging of these mutations and maintains genetic integrity. Seedless varieties lack this mechanism. This phenomenon, known as Muller's ratchet, named after Nobel laureate Hermann Joseph Muller who first described it, suggests that even in the absence of external threats like disease or climate change, clonally reproduced seedless varieties may face an internal genetic countdown to failure. The emerging picture is one of multiple vulnerabilities converging: genetic uniformity creating disease susceptibility, inability to adapt to changing climates, disruption of ecological relationships, and the accumulation of genetic errors through clonal propagation. Each of these factors alone would be concerning. Together, they create what systems biologists call a perfect storm scenario. Yet despite these gathering storm clouds, seedless fruit production continues to expand. Global production of seedless watermelons increased by 46% between 2010 and 2020. Seedless grape varieties now account for over 80% of global table grape production. The transition to seedless mandarin varieties has transformed citrus industries from California to Spain. This expansion has been driven not by ignorance of the risks but by powerful short-term economic incentives. Seedless varieties typically command price premiums of 15 to 40% over their seeded counterparts. Retailers prefer them because consumers have been trained to expect the convenience of seedlessness. The market, in essence, has selected for vulnerability. We're making a classic error in risk assessment, says Dr. Reynolds. We're prioritizing known, immediate benefits over unknown, long-term risks. It's the same pattern we see with many environmental issues, the convenience of today traded for the stability of tomorrow. But as we look deeper into the mechanisms that create this vulnerability, we begin to see that the problem is not merely one of agricultural practice or consumer preference. It strikes at the heart of how life on Earth has functioned for hundreds of millions of years. The fundamental problem with seedless fruits becomes clear when we examine what seeds actually are. Not merely reproductive structures, but sophisticated packages of genetic innovation and resilience. Seeds represent one of evolution's most successful adaptations, first appearing around 360 million years ago. They transformed the plant kingdom, allowing colonization of diverse terrestrial environments and setting the stage for the explosion of plant diversity that shapes our world. Seeds are not merely plant embryos. They are complex survival capsules with multiple functions essential to plant resilience. A seed is essentially a plant's way of hedging its bets against an uncertain future, explains Dr. Aaron Packwood, evolutionary botanist at Harvard University. Each seed contains a unique genetic combination, a novel experiment in adaptation. When plants reproduce sexually to create seeds, they shuffle their genetic material, creating offspring with varied combinations of traits. This genetic recombination is the raw material of evolution, allowing plant populations to maintain genetic diversity and adapt to changing conditions. Some offspring will carry genetic combinations better suited to resisting new diseases, surviving drought, or tolerating temperature shifts. It's nature's research and development department, says Benjamin Whitfield. Every generation, every seed, represents a new prototype tested against current conditions. This process has shaped plant evolution for hundreds of millions of years, producing the astounding diversity of the plant kingdom. From towering redwoods to delicate orchids, from desert cacti to aquatic lilies, all are products of this endless evolutionary experimentation through seed production. Seeds also function as time capsules, allowing plants to survive through adverse conditions and disperse across landscapes. The oldest viable seed ever germinated was a 2,000-year-old date palm seed discovered at Masada, Israel. This ability to remain dormant yet viable, sometimes for centuries, provides plant species with remarkable resilience against environmental fluctuations. When we create and propagate seedless fruits, we short-circuit this entire system. We replace evolution's sophisticated adaptive machinery with human selection for a single set of traits, often prioritizing appearance, shelf life, and convenience over resilience and adaptability. The pivotal insight that transforms our understanding of seedless fruit production is this: we are not merely creating convenient variants of familiar fruits. We are fundamentally altering the evolutionary trajectory of these species, removing them from the adaptive processes that have ensured plant survival for millions of years. This realization became starkly apparent in 2018, when a team of researchers led by Dr. Vanessa Kowalski at the International Agrobiodiversity Institute compared the genetic diversity of seeded and seedless varieties across 7 major fruit crops. The results were more extreme than even pessimistic experts had predicted. We found that commercial seedless varieties contained less than 3% of the genetic diversity present in their seeded counterparts, Dr. Kowalski reported. In evolutionary terms, these are not even the same organisms anymore. They've become something else entirely, genetic dead ends maintained solely through human intervention. This genetic bottleneck creates vulnerability that manifests in multiple ways. The most immediate is susceptibility to disease and pests, a vulnerability that increases with each passing year as pathogens evolve, while our fruit varieties remain genetically static. In 2023, this vulnerability was dramatically demonstrated when a new strain of Botrytis cinerea, gray mold fungus, emerged in California vineyards, while seeded grape varieties showed varied resistance, with some varieties losing 15 to 20% of their crop. Seedless varieties were devastated uniformly, with crop losses exceeding 70% in Thompson seedless and Flame seedless varieties. It was like watching identical twins get the same illness at the same time, said Miguel Ortiz, a 5th-generation grape grower in California's Central Valley. Every plant got sick in exactly the same way at exactly the same rate. There was no variation, no resistance, nothing for us to work with. This incident highlighted a critical weakness in our agricultural system. When pathogens breach the defenses of a clonally propagated crop, they effectively breach the defenses of the entire variety simultaneously. There are no resistant individuals to form the basis of recovery or breeding programs. The long-term implications become even more concerning when we consider the accelerating pace of climate change. Plants have historically adapted to climate shifts through the mechanism of natural selection acting on genetically diverse populations. Seedless varieties, unable to reproduce sexually and generate new genetic combinations, lack this adaptive capacity entirely. Computer models developed by an international team at the Global Crop Diversity Trust predict that by 2050, many growing regions for seedless fruits will experience climate conditions that exceed the tolerance ranges of current varieties. Without the ability to evolve through seed-based reproduction, these varieties face potential collapse. We're essentially creating crops that are perfectly adapted to a world that's rapidly disappearing, explains Dr. Diana Reynolds. It's like building a house on the beach without considering the rising tide. This vulnerability extends beyond commercial agriculture to the wild progenitors and relatives of our cultivated fruits, plants that contain genetic diversity vital for future breeding programs. As commercial seedless varieties have expanded, they've increasingly displaced traditional seeded varieties in agricultural landscapes. In regions of Turkey and Iran, traditional seeded grape varieties that had been cultivated for thousands of years have disappeared from more than 60% of their historic range in just the past 3 decades, replaced by commercial seedless varieties. This loss of agricultural biodiversity represents the disappearance of genetic resources that may prove crucial for addressing future agricultural challenges. Dr. Javier Mendoza, who directs the International Seed Bank Initiative, puts it bluntly, "We're burning the genetic library before we've read most of the books. These disappearing varieties contain adaptive traits we haven't even identified yet, much less understood." The turning point in our understanding came in 2021, when a comprehensive meta-analysis published in Nature Plants compiled data from more than 300 studies across 24 countries, examining the long-term productivity and resilience of seedless fruit crops compared to their seeded counterparts. The analysis revealed a pattern that had been hidden in plain sight. While seedless varieties initially showed productivity advantages and lower management costs, these benefits eroded over time. After 15 to 20 years of continuous cultivation, seedless varieties began showing significantly higher vulnerability to novel pathogens, greater yield instability under weather fluctuations, and increasing dependency on chemical interventions to maintain production. It was like watching the health trajectory of someone who never exercises, explained Dr. Kowalski, who contributed to the analysis. In the short term, they might seem fine, but over decades, problems accumulate that can't be easily reversed. This research transformed the scientific understanding of seedless fruit production from a matter of consumer preference and market efficiency to a fundamental question of agricultural sustainability. The convenience of seedlessness, it became clear, came with hidden costs that accumulate over time, costs that could ultimately threaten the very existence of these fruit varieties. But the most profound insight emerged from the growing understanding that seeds are not merely reproductive structures, but serve multiple ecological functions beyond the continuation of the species. Seeds feed wildlife, replenish soil organic matter, maintain mycorrhizal fungal networks, and drive co-evolutionary relationships with seed-dispersing animals. Dr. Elena Martinez, an agroecologist who studies fruit crop ecosystems at the University of Barcelona, has documented cascading ecological effects in regions dominated by seedless fruit production. We're seeing declines in seed-eating bird populations, changes in soil microbial communities, and disruptions to nutrient cycling, she reports. These systems are simplified and increasingly fragile. The emerging picture represents a fundamental reconsideration of what fruits are and the role they play in natural systems. Far from being simply foods for human consumption, fruits evolved as sophisticated seed dispersal mechanisms, packages designed to entice animals into transporting seeds to new locations. By removing the seeds while keeping the attractive flesh, we have created what ecologists call evolutionary ghosts, structures that mimic their natural counterparts in appearance but have been stripped of their ecological function. This perspective shift helps explain why seedless fruit production creates vulnerabilities that extend beyond the plants themselves to entire agricultural ecosystems. We have not merely created convenient variants of familiar foods. We have disrupted fundamental ecological relationships that maintain system resilience. When we create seedless fruits, we're essentially breaking an ecological contract that has been in place for millions of years, explains Benjamin Whitfield. Fruits evolved as a mutualistic relationship. Animals get nutrition, plants get seed dispersal. Seedless fruits take the nutrition but provide nothing in return. That's not just an agricultural choice. It's an ecological disruption with consequences we're only beginning to understand. This realization, that seedlessness represents not merely a convenient trait, but a fundamental disruption of evolutionary and ecological processes, transforms our understanding of the risks involved. The vulnerability of seedless fruits is not merely a technical agricultural challenge. It is a symptom of a deeper disengagement from the evolutionary processes that sustain life on Earth. The implications of our seedless fruit predicament extend far beyond agricultural statistics or botanical curiosities. They touch upon fundamental questions about food security, ecological health, and humanity's relationship with evolutionary processes. The most immediate concern is the vulnerability of our food supply. Fruit crops represent not merely pleasant dietary additions, but significant nutritional resources for billions of people worldwide. Fruits provide essential micronutrients, fiber, and phytochemicals that cannot be easily replaced by other food groups. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that fruit consumption is already below recommended levels in most regions. Any significant disruption to fruit production would have immediate health consequences. We've created a perfect storm for catastrophic crop failure, warns Dr. William Patterson, director of the Center for Food Security at Stanford University. Genetic uniformity across vast acreage, combined with intensifying climate stress and accelerating pathogen evolution, it's difficult to imagine a more vulnerable system. The historical precedent is not encouraging. Beyond the banana example mentioned earlier, similar dynamics have played out across multiple crops. In 1970, a new strain of corn leaf blight destroyed more than 15% of the U.S. corn crop, specifically targeting varieties with a genetic feature called T cytoplasm that have been widely adopted for commercial hybrid production. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s similarly devastated a genetically uniform potato crop. The difference with today's seedless fruit crops is the limited ability to respond through breeding programs. When pathogens overwhelm seeded crops, breeders can identify resistant individuals and use their seeds to develop new, resistant varieties within a few generations. With seedless crops, this rapid adaptive response is impossible. New varieties must be developed through much slower processes of induced mutation or genetic engineering. It's like having your emergency exits welded shut, explains Dr. Diana Reynolds. When disaster strikes a seeded crop, there's a path forward through breeding. With seedless varieties, that path doesn't exist. This vulnerability creates economic risks that extend beyond farming communities. The global fruit industry represents approximately $240 billion in annual trade value. Regions like California's Central Valley, Chile's export agriculture zones, and Mediterranean fruit-growing regions depend heavily on seedless varieties for economic stability. Widespread failure of these crops would devastate regional economies and disrupt global food supply chains. But beyond these immediate practical concerns lie deeper questions about humanity's relationship with biological systems. The creation and expansion of seedless fruits represent what evolutionary biologist Dr. Marcus Feldman calls evolutionary hijacking, the redirection of plant development away from its evolved purposes toward narrow human preferences. We're essentially converting these plants from evolutionary players into evolutionary objects, Dr. Feldman explains. They no longer participate in the dance of adaptation and counter-adaptation that characterizes living systems. They become artifacts maintained entirely through human intervention. This pattern, converting evolutionary subjects into technological objects, extends beyond seedless fruits to many aspects of modern agriculture. But seedless varieties represent an extreme form of this intervention, one that completely eliminates the core reproductive capability of the organism. The implications of this shift become particularly concerning when we consider the accelerating pace of environmental change. Plants have historically adapted to changing conditions through the mechanism of genetic recombination in sexual reproduction, precisely the mechanism eliminated in seedless varieties. Climate models project that by 2050, many major fruit-growing regions will experience novel climate conditions outside the historical parameters to which current varieties are adapted. Under natural conditions, Plant populations would respond to these changes through evolutionary adaptation. Some individuals would possess genetic combinations better suited to new conditions and would produce more offspring, gradually shifting the population's genetic composition. Seedless varieties have no such adaptive capacity. They can only be maintained through increasingly intensive human intervention. More irrigation, more pesticides, more fungicides, more climate control. This creates what resilience theorists call brittle systems, arrangements that can maintain functioning only through escalating inputs and interventions. We're creating agricultural systems that can only survive through life support, says Dr. Reynolds. That might be sustainable when resources are abundant and conditions are stable. But in a world of climate change, water scarcity, and escalating energy costs, it's a precarious position. This precariousness extends to the genetic resources upon which future breeding efforts depend. As commercial seedless varieties have expanded, they've increasingly displaced traditional seeded landraces, locally adapted varieties maintained by traditional farming communities. These landraces represent irreplaceable repositories of genetic diversity, adapted to specific local conditions through centuries or millennia of selection. A 2022 survey by the International Crop Diversity Trust found that over 80% of traditional seeded grape varieties documented in the Caucasus region in the 1950s have disappeared from active cultivation, many replaced by commercial seedless varieties. Similar patterns have been documented in apple, citrus, and stone fruit diversity. We're narrowing the genetic base precisely when we should be broadening it, warns Dr. Javier Mendoza. Climate change and emerging diseases make genetic diversity more valuable than ever, yet our market systems continue to drive us toward uniformity and seedlessness. This loss of agrobiodiversity represents more than just agricultural narrowing. It reflects a loss of cultural heritage as well. Many traditional varieties are deeply embedded in cultural practices, regional cuisines, and traditional ecological knowledge. As these varieties disappear, cultural practices and knowledge systems disappear with them. Doria Ramirez, an ethnobotanist who documents traditional fruit varieties in Mexico, has watched this process unfold in real time. When a village stops growing their traditional seeded fruits and switches to commercial seedless varieties, they don't just lose a plant. They lose recipes, stories, seasonal celebrations, even language terms specific to those fruits and their cultivation. But perhaps the most profound implication lies in how seedless fruit production reflects humanity's changing relationship with natural processes. For most of agricultural history, human cultivation worked alongside evolutionary processes. Farmers selected favorable traits, but still relied on the genetic recombination of sexual reproduction to maintain vigor and adaptability. Modern seedless fruit production represents a fundamental break from this partnership, attempting to freeze plants in a perpetual state of human-preferred traits. There's a kind of hubris in thinking we can improve on 300 million years of plant evolution, says Benjamin Whitfield. Seeds aren't an inconvenience to be engineered away. They're sophisticated survival mechanisms central to plant resilience. This perspective shift helps clarify why the issues with seedless fruits cannot be solved through simple technical adjustments. They represent not merely agricultural challenges but philosophical ones. Questions about humanity's proper relationship with evolutionary processes and living systems. We're conducting a massive uncontrolled experiment with our food systems, notes Dr. Elena Martinez. We're discovering that convenience and standardization, pushed too far, create dangerous fragility. As we face the implications of this experiment, the path forward requires more than technical adjustments. It demands a fundamental reconsideration of how we value agricultural biodiversity, how we balance convenience against resilience, and how we position our food systems within the broader context of evolutionary and ecological processes. The question is not whether seedless fruits should exist. They clearly have a place in our agricultural systems. The question is one of scale, diversity, and balance. How do we maintain the convenience that consumers value while rebuilding the resilience that comes from genetic diversity and evolutionary capacity? In the sprawling orchards of the Central Valley, as dawn breaks over endless rows of identical trees bearing identical seedless fruits, we confront a profound paradox of modern agriculture. What appears to be abundance, fruit perfect in form, consistent in flavor, convenient for consumption, conceals an underlying biological poverty. These fruits, replicated endlessly through human intervention, represent not evolution's triumph but its suspension. The story of seedless fruits offers a microcosm of humanity's broader relationship with natural systems. In our quest for convenience and control, we have often mistaken simplification for improvement, uniformity for progress. We have created agricultural systems that deliver precisely what we ask of them: consistency, predictability, standardization, without recognizing that these very qualities, taken to extremes, create unprecedented vulnerability. Seeds are more than inconveniences to be engineered away. They represent the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of evolution, sophisticated survival mechanisms that allow plants to adapt, persist, and thrive through changing conditions. When we create seedless varieties, we aren't merely removing an unwanted plant part. We are disconnecting these species from the very processes that have ensured their resilience since the dawn of flowering plants. The path forward requires neither an abandonment of modern agriculture nor a naive return to pre-industrial farming. Instead, it demands a more sophisticated integration of human innovation with evolutionary processes, what agroecologists call evolutionary agriculture. This approach recognizes that our food systems must maintain not just productivity but adaptability, not just efficiency but resilience. This means maintaining diverse portfolios of both seeded and seedless varieties, preserving traditional landraces alongside commercial cultivars, and developing breeding programs that can rapidly respond to emerging threats. It means creating market systems that value diversity alongside uniformity, resilience alongside efficiency. For consumers, it means reconsidering what we demand from our food, recognizing that the minor inconvenience of a seed might be a small price to pay for agricultural systems that can weather the storms of a changing climate and evolving pathogens. The seeming perfection of a seedless grape or the convenience of a seedless watermelon carries within it a hidden cost, one that future generations may pay if we fail to maintain the evolutionary capacity of our food crops. The fruit that cannot create a future through seeds has no guaranteed future of its own. As Benjamin Whitfield puts it, seeds represent nature's ultimate act of optimism, a bet placed on tomorrow despite today's uncertainties. In creating seedless fruits, we've prioritized our present convenience over the plant's future. The question is whether we can find a balance that serves both. The story of seedless fruit is not merely about agricultural techniques or consumer preferences. It is about humanity's place within the broader tapestry of life, whether we position ourselves as controllers standing outside natural processes or as participants working within them. It is about whether we value the elegant solutions evolved over millions of years or believe we can engineer better ones in decades. As we face unprecedented planetary changes, climate disruption, biodiversity loss, emerging diseases, the resilience of our food systems will depend on maintaining their evolutionary capacity. Seeds, with their remarkable ability to carry life through adverse conditions and generate novel genetic combinations, represent an irreplaceable source of that resilience. In the end, the seedless fruit on your supermarket shelf is neither villain nor victim but a reminder of both human ingenuity and our capacity to overlook long-term consequences in favor of immediate benefits. It represents both what we can create and what we can lose in the process of creation. The convenience of seedlessness must be balanced against the resilience that comes from maintaining the full reproductive capacity of our crop plants. Finding this balance between what serves us now and what serves the future, between standardization and diversity, between technological control and evolutionary partnership, represents one of the great agricultural challenges of our time. In a world of accelerating change and growing uncertainty, the humble seed, nature's time capsule of genetic innovation and resilience, may prove to be not an inconvenience to engineer away but a biological treasure to preserve, protect, and honor. For in those tiny packages lies not merely the future of individual plants but the adaptability and resilience of our food systems and, ultimately, our own future on this changing planet. The seed's message is simple yet profound. True security comes not from freezing the present, but from maintaining the capacity to adapt to the future. A lesson we ignore at our peril as we shape the fruits of tomorrow.